The day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say, Peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, and they shall not escape. Zola Levitt presents Signs of the End.
Shalom, hello again, and welcome back to our Signs of the End series. We've been majoring in the verse about spreading the gospel in all nations, and we have found some Christian folks. The Lord sends people along just in the right time, and we found some interesting people of some nations we don't usually reach. Saudi Arabia is completely off limits to Americans unless they need us to defend them. They're hostile to the gospel and to this country, despite Desert Storm. But we found somebody who lived in Saudi Arabia 11 years, Oswaldo Magdangal, who is a Philippine nationalist. We call him Wally, which is his nickname, a Philippine national who worked in the Saudi Arabian government in a high position. And on the side, since he was a Christian, he pastored a church, an underground church, right in his home. His testimony, I'm afraid, is a real indictment of Islam and of the very primitive country, Saudi Arabia.
Well, when we got there in the early 80s, my first experience was when I saw American pastors and some Westerners from Europe. They were arrested and they were threatened. They were given a 24-hour notice to leave the country when they were discovered to be involved in the underground church. Now, Americans and Westerners from Europe are fortunate because when the religious authorities discover them having underground activities as Christians, they're just sent home. But in my case, I'm from the Philippines, from a third world country. We are treated differently. And the persecutions increased as the years went by, and we will gather. Church in Saudi Arabia is not like in America where you had church buildings, sanctuaries. We normally come together in houses, home churches, just like in the book of Acts.
Yeah.
See, that's why I was so encouraged, because I saw the continuation of Acts. And to many of us in Saudi Arabia, we considered it the 29th chapter of Acts taking place, unfolding right before us. Well, the authorities kept on seeking after the leaders of the underground church, and one arrest led to another. Eventually, in 1991, to be exact, they stumbled upon the church that I was pastoring. Now, I was not the first pastor of that church. I was the fourth pastor. The first three pastors were Americans. When the last one left Saudi Arabia for another foreign assignment, the Lord ordained me and raised me up to replace the last pastor, and I was the first to pastor from a third world country. And
you became the pastor of the underground church,
yes, sir.
In Saudi Arabia.
And it was then known as the Riyadh International Christian Fellowship. And
Riyadh is the capital.
Yes, sir, the very capital of Saudi Arabia, and it was the biggest international congregation in that city.
So you had a very important position. You were an outlaw, but you were the pastor of the church.
That's right, sir. At the same time, I was working with the government in the Ministry of Defense, and I was the executive secretary to the director himself.
Oh my gosh!
And he promoted me to another position, and I was part of personnel administration, and I was in charge of the hiring of foreign workers for the Ministry of Defense.
Personnel work.
Yes, sir. Personnel work. And at the same time, I was very much involved and active in the underground church. Eventually, I became the pastor in February of 1989. And when the authorities stumbled upon the church, it was only a few hours before the outbreak of the Persian Gulf War. You remember former President George Bush went on worldwide satellite to declare war against the forces of Saddam Hussein on January 16.
Yes, I remember.
It was January 15 when the authorities raided the church that I was pastoring and confiscated everything in it. They left only one thing that they couldn't take with them because it was large and heavy, the piano. But they smashed it to pieces before they left. they were able to apprehend some of the brothers who were with us, who were in the church, in the house, okay, the church where we used to gather. And they interrogated them one by one. Through intense interrogation, one of them identified the church, the name of the church, and under tremendous pressure as well, he identified me before the authorities.
What sort of pressure? Are they really torturing these people?
No, not actually torture in the physical sense of the word, but mental pressure, and threats. And so one of them, unfortunately, or probably fortunately, he revealed my identity to them. But I am a Christian who always believes in the miracles of God, of Jesus. And when he gave my name, he gave it as Wali Magdangal. In Saudi Arabia, all the Christians there knew me by my nickname, Pastor Wali. And many of them do not even know my family name. But when he gave my name, Wali Magdangal, the investigator has written it incorrectly, that when they read it in Arabic, it would read Wali MacDonald. MacDonald, right? So they started to look for Wali MacDonald from that day. And my name was included in the most wanted criminal lists in Saudi Arabia.
That's what struck me. I read an article about you. You were the most wanted criminal in Saudi Arabia because you were a Christian pastor.
Sir. Yes, sir.
You weren't a robber.
No, and I consider that actually as a great privilege and an honor, to be considered one of the most wanted criminals, yet not a criminal, but because of my Christian faith.
Rather like Jesus himself, who was a wanted man for preaching the gospel.
The Lord has said it in the Word, if they persecuted me, they will persecute you. Most probably, if we, the Bible also tells us that those who try to live a godly life will be persecuted. And so, we in Saudi Arabia had no other options. In all the years that I was there, I found myself getting deeper in my commitment in the church. At the same time, even as the persecutions increased, I was not discouraged. All the more that I was encouraged, because I could see acts taking place in reality, the book of Acts.
Yes.
And when the authorities started to look for me, they could not find me for 1 year and 10 months because of that simple, incorrect misspelling on my name. Yeah. Well, eventually, they caught up with me in October 14 of 1992 because I was betrayed by a former brother in the Lord. He has backslidden, converted to Islam, and betrayed me in exchange for the amount of 30,000 reals. And 30,000 reals, if my calculations are correct, are approximately $8,000 US.
So you've got a higher price than Jesus.
I don't know, sir. I don't know what 30 pieces of silver is as compared to 30,000 reals. I don't know. But the 30 is quite similar. Yes, anyway, they came to my house, and when they arrested me, I was in the middle of a prayer meeting. I was down on my knees, praying to Father when the authorities came to arrest me. They did not present any warrants of arrest or search. And what they did was to search my house illegally because there were no legal documents. And I have always known that they should first provide those documents before they do anything. But, they told me it was, they were the religious authorities. And of course, I knew immediately it was one of those illegal raids and arrests that they have been conducting all those years. Anyway, finally, when we left my house looked like a place hit by the Scud missiles of Saddam Hussein because of the intense search. Yeah. We left behind my wife and my daughter, and we tried to argue with the leaders, with the leader of the raiding party to take us as a family to prison, but they refused. Apparently, they told me I was the only one that they wanted. So for the first time in my life, on the early morning of October 1992, October 15 to be exact, I was thrown into prison.
If you travel to the Holy Land just once in your lifetime, let it be with Zola Levitt. Zola has been touring the Bible lands for almost 20 years. His knowledge of the land and understanding of its people mean an outstanding pilgrimage for you. Journey through the Holy Land with Zola Levitt and experience the Jewish roots of your Christian faith. For the tour of this lifetime, write Zola, Box 12268, Dallas, Texas 75225.
I was placed in a cell measuring about 3 meters by 5 meters with 25 other prisoners.
Oh, no.
And because there was no room, I could not sleep. I could not even lie down.
You can lie on the
I
floor
can't,
with that many
I
men.
can't even lie down because it was 3 in the morning and everyone was sleeping, okay? There was no room for me. I
Yes.
simply sat beside the toilet. But I was only in that place for 2 hours when the guards transferred me to solitary confinement. So I was in a solitary confinement with no lights, no nothing. It was dirty, it was dark, it smelled so bad. And for the first time in my life, I experienced what it means to have nothing at all. You see, they took away everything from me. The small plastic bag that my wife had me bring with me, it had my toothpaste, toothbrush, soap, and etc. Basic necessities were taken from me and they were thrown in the trash. Even the slippers that I had on were taken away. So I was barefooted inside solitary confinement with my basic clothes only. And winter time was approaching and it was cold and dark in that cell. Well, I thank God when that experience happened to me, I was a Christian. Because otherwise, I tell you, it was unbearable. I would have committed suicide. On the second day of my imprisonment, they took me out and placed handcuffs and shackles on my feet. I was brought to a room upstairs where 3 Saudi officers started to torture me. The first thing they did was they squeezed the handcuffs against my wrist so tightly, and then they started to beat me up. As they were doing those things, I said, Father, these people are not my enemies. It is Satan who is angry with me. And I said, because they do not know what they are doing, please forgive them. And I said, Father, receive my spirit in your hands. They can have my body, they can do anything with my body, but please don't allow them to take my life away. Because I believe if I get through this suffering and I'm a free person once more, I have a wonderful story to tell the world. And they beat me up badly that night. They made the guards return me to my cell. And I was back in my cell after 3 hours and 30 minutes of torture. They left me in solitary confinement at the very end, the last cell that they had there.
Well, excuse me, it's hard to even imagine they are beating and torturing you because of what you believe.
Oh, yes, sir.
You didn't do any other crime.
No, I have a clean record in the government.
You were a high...
Yes, I was high in the government, actually. I had many friends among the royal, the royal family, the government
the defense ministry and all the rest when you were dragged off to jail?
Well, there was a big commotion, actually, in the organization, and questions were being asked. Is Wally, who is Wally? Is Wally a spy from Israel? Is he connected?
They accuse you of being a spy?
Yeah, no, those were questions asked, They were asking those questions particularly to my wife. Was I connected with the United Nations? Things like that, because I was deeply inside the Ministry of Defense.
Okay, so here you are at the end of the hall.
I'm here. I'm left to die, after the torture. But you know something? God came to visit me inside my cell. There was a light that came into my cell, and then I experienced the presence of God Almighty. I did not see God physically, but I experienced hands coming upon my face like this, touch me. And I heard a voice speak to me from heaven. And before the presence departed, I felt fingers make me smile like this. I stood inside my cell 7 hours and 30 minutes after the torture. And as I examined my body, the parts that were badly beaten, I could not find a single mark of the torture. A miracle has taken place. The torture, by the way, was from my head to the bottom of my feet.
What did they do?
They slapped me, they boxed me, they kicked me. They were not content with that. They started to flog me. I was lost in my palms, my back, and at the soles of my feet. Terribly beaten. God only knows. It's only by the grace of God that I survived the torture. And it took a miracle from God to restore me completely 7 hours and 30 minutes after they beat me up badly. They were so astonished to see me without any mark of the torture. They brought me to the courts of Saudi Arabia. I was brought to the courts. From the lowest court, I moved up the ladder until I reached the Supreme Court. You know why? Because all the courts, from the lowest to the Supreme Court, could not sentence me.
Well, and what was the cause?
Charges, the charges were read to me, from the lowest to the Supreme Court. The same charges were read to me. There was an interpreter in English, and they said, we want you to know that You are charged with, number one, building a church in Saudi Arabia, praying with Christians in your house, and preaching the Bible in Saudi Arabia.
These things are crimes for which a person can get flogged.
I do not know, sir, because they failed to sentence me, you see, in the courts.
Okay.
And I was brought to the courts without any lawyer nor representative from my government. I was alone, bound on my hands and on my feet with 2 police escorts. But I know the word of God. I have a great intercessor who was with me all the time, our Lord Jesus. My case, having been tried in all the courts, could not be sentenced. My case was referred to the governor of Riyadh. The governor could not sentence me. That made the religious hierarchy people very angry.
Yeah.
In my absence, I was tried in a court, religious court, Sharia. And I was charged with blasphemy and subversion. And then I was finally sentenced to die by hanging. I came to know about this November 9, 1992.
Well, America sort of supports Saudi Arabia, like
I know it.
pointing out. I mean, are we aware, the average American aware of how primitive this state is?
That's something that I don't know,
It's
sir.
anti-Christian.
Well, I know probably that they know this, but
Yeah, I mean, I'm a Christian, okay, it's a Muslim republic, etc. But so anti-Christian as to torture a man like you, obviously a soft-spoken, your worst crime is what you believe.
well, that's not, like I said earlier, it does not represent the majority of the
You're
Muslims.
not a rabble-rouser, you're not a spy. Anybody can
I'm
see
not,
that.
of course, yes. And my friends there, among themselves, the local citizens, knew that I was not one. They knew my sincerity as a government worker. So, but still, you see, it was the religious authorities who were against me. To make a long story short, my wife felt that she was led by the Spirit of God to write an appeal letter to the government in Manila in my behalf.
All the way to the Philippines.
All the way to the Philippines, and considering it was just 1 week before my execution. The letter finally gets into the hands of the Philippine President Fidel Ramos a few days before my execution. When he got it, he was so angry, he asked all the media in the Philippines to carry my story in the following day's newspapers, television, and radio. So on December 22nd, my story shook the Christians in the Philippines. Okay, it was headline in the newspapers. At the same time, while all these things were taking place, there was a Filipino pastor who used to be with me in Saudi Arabia. When he got word that I was going to be executed, he immediately called by long distance the last American who pastored the church in Saudi Arabia. And the American was now in Dayton, Ohio. When he got the word that this pastor in Dayton, he brought it to the church and they prayed for me. And then the pastor of the church he was attending, advised him, why don't you tell Congressman Tony Hall about this? He may do something. And you know what? I thank God for the American people, because Congressman Tony Hall of Ohio ran with my story the moment he heard it. He instructed his secretaries to inform Amnesty International, the United Nations, and he informed them to get in touch with several congressmen from America and put tremendous pressure on the Saudi Arabian ambassador in Washington, D.C. While all these things are going on, my story was carried worldwide. On December 23rd, after I just prayed inside my prison cell, there was a fellow inmate with a transistor radio. 7 o'clock in the evening, December 23, he switches on his radio, and we receive BBC from London. And when the newscaster mentions the first news item for the day, he was talking about my coming execution. And I tell you, that was bad news to me. And I said, Lord,
Really?
yeah, I said, Lord,
I hate that one.
I said, Lord, I said, Lord, I heard this November 9 from the lips of one of the torturers, but now I hear the confirmation for the first time from BBC, world news. Well, anyway, because it was world news, people who heard it, leaders who heard it, political and religious leaders, started to intervene in my behalf, and they appealed to Saudi Arabia. A few hours before my execution, on Christmas Eve, December 24, because of tremendous pressure, I was taken out from prison, brought to the airport, still chained on my hands and on my feet, placed on an aircraft that took me all the way from Riyadh to Manila on a direct flight.
Oh my gosh.
The plane lands in Manila on Christmas Day at 11:30 in the morning. Now, I was supposed to be executed December 25, 1992, 12 noon, after the noontime prayers.
Did they pick Christmas Day on purpose?
No, not really, because it so happens that probably you are aware of this. In Saudi Arabia and in other Islamic countries who have the Sharia law, they normally execute prisoners on Fridays after the noontime prayers. Okay, and in Saudi Arabia, almost every Friday there is an execution in the public plaza. Now, it so happened that 1992 Christmas Day was a Friday. All right, so it was the time that I was scheduled. Now, probably they were also aware it was Christmas. I don't know. We know, only God knows.
Okay, so we get off the plane in Manila? And
Yes, sir, at 11:30.
All night.
Yeah, a free man at 11:30 in the morning, 30 minutes before the execution. I walked outside the arrival area and at exactly 12 o'clock, I was in the arms of my mother, who met me, and we were crying. And you know what my mother told me? Son, since the first day of your arrest on October 15, when your wife called me, I started to pray for you until today, Christmas Day. Day and night, I knelt before God and I prayed to God, Father, if you will give me a birthday present, I want my son Wally free, alive, in the Philippines and in my arms. And I tell you, as we were embracing each other, it was 12 o'clock, December 25. It was also my mother's birthday.
Well,
It was her birthday and she got her birthday request.
my goodness, what a story. You're a Bible reader and a pastor. What's your view then of prophecy? Where are we and what's going to happen?
Well, where are we? You know, the Bible says, even Jesus said it, there will be an increase of wickedness in the last days. You know, he likened the days of the last days just like in the days of Noah. And now we see the same things happening, you know, giving up to marriage, marry, you know, live life and be married, drink, and
Don't care.
yeah, and everything like that. See, and we see all these things happening now. Now, what breaks my heart is in a country like America, which was founded by scriptures, you see people turning their backs on religion now, on the Christian faith. You know, I hear of stories like they would no longer allow children to pray in school.
Yeah.
And I heard of a lady who was interviewed on television just last week, and she was complaining. She was on a bus one day and she was sharing her testimony of how she got saved and about Jesus. And the lady driver, American, he stops her bus, walks up to her and says, "Lady, don't talk about Jesus in my bus."
Oh, really?
Imagine. And I thought America was the nation that bannered democracy.
Made you homesick
And
for
that
Saudi
shocks me.
Arabia.
Yes, sir, really. And I tell you, I'm beginning to see the signs of the end times right in America
You
itself.
think this brings Jesus coming closer?
Oh, yes, sir, definitely. And I'm excited and I'm thrilled about his coming. And another thing, Islam, they claim, is the greatest or the fastest growing religion. It is a complete and a simple lie, okay? Because, yes, people are confessing it now and many are believing it. But, you know, the devil has always been a liar since the beginning. And up to this day, he has been so effective in blinding the eyes of people and deceiving people. And these are one of the signs of the end times. Okay, I see it that not long from now, okay, the Quranic curtain or the wall of Islam will begin to crumble. Actually, the cracks are there. The Quranic veil is already torn from top. It will not take long from now, it will be torn up to the bottom. I have seen it when I was in Saudi Arabia. The discontent, the infighting between the different groups there, it won't take long. You know, in all the history of the world, as we look at history very closely, consider that most recent situation in the Soviet Union. The collapse of communism in the Soviet Union did not come from outside forces. It was from within. And I see the same thing happening in Islam. It will come from within.
So the end times to you, for different reasons, are very near.
Yes, sir.
Thanks for sharing.
You're most welcome.
That is really some story. You know, there are Wallies all over the Arab world. They're killed every day in secret. We don't hear about them. They're certainly not all success stories. While we deal with these primitive cultures, can you imagine? I still can't quite get over the President of the United States visiting the murderer who happens to be the dictator of Syria right now, one of the bloodiest murderers at large in the world today, in total control of millions of people. giving life and death, and very often death, over them. And we're bowing in the throne room and trying to make a deal and dismembering the promised land and giving part of it to him. This must be the end times, is all I can say. Craziness is going on that can't be accounted for otherwise. But this persecution of Christians is normal. The Lord said, ye shall have tribulation. Let me, I had a missionary who worked the deserts in the Middle East. That's a tough mission field. In the old days of my radio program, he said something 20 years ago I've never forgotten. I said, don't you get afraid out there going up to desert tribesmen and trying to talk about Christ, meeting the hostile Muslims and trying to talk about Christ? And he said, yes, I get persecuted, but and I feel strong because of it. The American church is weak and flabby. It doesn't get enough exercise. The proper exercise of the church is persecution. We have somehow made a church where we are the nicest people in town. That's not what was intended in the gospel. Jesus wasn't popular. As a matter of fact, he was crucified. The apostles weren't popular when they rode into town. Why, Paul spent many nights in jail, was beaten, was run out of town. If everybody in town likes you, including the unbelievers, conceivably, you're not giving a testimony of Christ. That isn't a representative of what happened back then. Wally is a normal Christian. That is, he worships the Lord under any circumstances, and if persecution comes, it comes. I wish I could do as well, but I'm glad I could share the story with you. In the tribulation period, the persecution of Christians will be horrendous. When the Lord comes back and holds that sheep and goats trial, and we talk about it all the time, he'll separate them out by who helped the ones who were hungry and naked and in prison and so on. And most intensively, these are, he says, the least of my brethren in Matthew 25:40. The Jewish people who go around in the tribulation, sharing in all nations, including Saudi Arabia, including Syria, in that tribulation period. Revelation 7:4 says, and I heard the number of them which were sealed, and there were sealed 144,000 of all the tribes of the children of Israel. And these famous 144,000 will keep the testimony going. Islam is powerful right now. It's troubling, but it will fall to the King of the Jews when he comes. Our Signs of the End book explains it all. The Signs of the End updated for the 90s. It's only $6. This is a book you should read. I wish you would send for it. $6 for Signs of the End. And you can get it at the post office box and the telephone number. And Sha'alu Shalom Yerushalayim. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Well,